G'day and welcome to The Other Side Interviews. I'm Damian and we have a very special guest tonight. There are a few people who've impacted the alternative media scene in Australia more than others. Pioneers and rebels of the early days of social media and online reporting. And one of those is Melbourne's AVI Yemeni, a man who makes the Energizer bunny look like a zombie. AVI is now with the international independent media outfit Rebel News, but it's his relentless coverage of the other side of the story during COVID, amid a Melbourne professional media class that were all too enamoured by Dan Andrews and busy towing the party line. AVI was fronting up to politicians and police with tough questions and hitting the streets to speak to protesters, for which AVI is best known. More recently, he headed to Davos and confronted the business TV networks for acting more like PR outfits than journalists in their coverage of the WEF forum. Something that caught the eye of Joe Rogan, no less.
There was some guy who was trying to interview someone from MSNBC, and he was like some independent journalist guy, and he was trying to talk to this guy on the street. Yeah. And the guy from MSNBC said something along the lines of someone should knock that fucking guy out, like threatened this guy for asking him questions about speaking truth to power.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you. Where are you from?
Rebel News.
Yes, but what is your interest? What is your
What do you mean? I'm covering the news. I'm doing what your bosses are supposed to be doing.
Okay.
Why did you get so upset? What's he so scared about?
No, I'm not scared. I'm
Not
just
you, not
interested.
you. Your boss. He seemed really scared. He ran in there and called you out.
No, it's just we have to know who is out here. And
My name's AVI Yemeni.
Yes.
I work for Rebel News.
Yes.
We're reporters. We do what CNBC is supposed to be doing. How you doing, sir? Can I ask you what CNBC is doing here? I can't ask you?
No, you can't.
Don't
I'd
you-
rather you didn't put a camera in my face, thank you.
Really? But you're here as an invited guest and you're an editor for CNBC. Don't you think that's a bit of a conflict of interest?
I'd like you to go away. I haven't agreed to an interview. If you're doorstepping me, like, go away. Seriously, take my camera.
Don't touch the mic.
Get away from me, brother.
You're meant to you're meant to be speaking truth to power. Are you here just to take your marching orders? Is that what you're here for?
Do you want to go away?
Not really. I'm here to do what you should be doing.
Yeah? Please take this out of my mouth. I'm going to have you escorted off with security.
All right. Do that. There you go.
So he goes
CNBC.
inside. Keep it going, because he goes inside, and that's when he says someone should knock this fucking guy out.
Escort me.
I want to hear what he actually says. I'm
No, I'm doing-
paraphrasing.
And now he's calling security to escort me off the premises. Well, you were inside as you walked in, a bit upset. What did you hear him say?
I heard him say, I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have the exact thing, but he came in sounding quite angry, saying, I'm going to punch him out. Paraphrasing there, he's knocked out, punched out, but, he wanted to hit you.
Yeah, and there's an actual recording of it.
okay.
But whatever. We get it. Is that same guy the guy that got set up by Jim Jeffries' show back in the day?
The guy that he was talking to, the CNBC guy?
Avi Yemeni.
Yep, that's the guy. And here he is joining us on The Other Side Interviews right now from Melbourne. AVI Yemeni, welcome.
G'day. Thanks for having me, mate.
Thanks for your time. Avi, just for those, just about everybody who watches this show probably knows who you are, but there might be a few who don't. So just for the benefit of those people, tell us how you got into this crazy, without going back too far, because we'll get to that, but how did you get into this crazy sort of social media, digital media, new media game?
Oh, well, I fell into it accidentally. At that time, I owned a couple of gyms here in Melbourne, Krav Maga gyms, and there was actually an operation in Israel in 2000 and I don't have the dates in front of me, but it was 2012, I think it was, when I was first introduced to fake news, because I couldn't have told you the difference between Liberal and Labor, although nowadays I'm also a little bit confused about it. But
Yes.
I didn't know left and right. I was apathetic like most Aussies. The one issue that I kind of cared about was Israel, because I'd served there, and then when I turned on the TV at night, I'd seen ABC reporting about this operation happening in Gaza, which I'd spent most of my service a few years earlier, and I knew that it was just false what they were reporting and how they were portraying that the conflict and the operation at the time. And
how were they portraying it, Avi? What were they saying?
It was just very one-sided. They were they were portraying, Israel only as the aggressor and these poor victims, and you could see where they were cherry-picking little clips and tying it together to suit their narrative, their woke agenda. At the time, I wouldn't have known anything. I just thought that is really unfair. So what I did was I decided to use my Facebook pages that were for the gyms. It was IDF training, so it was a play on words, but it was Krav Maga training. So it was kind of Israeli army sort of thing with ex-IDF soldiers. And I just started using the platform to tell people my actual experience of being there on the front line in Gaza, exactly where they were reporting, and kind of countering their narrative and saying, well, this is actually what I experienced there and what I saw there and what they're not showing you. Now that
so it started organically for you. You were writing this Facebook
It was
post.
really that the ABC pissed me off one night because they were talking about the one issue that I knew. I'm like everyone. I probably watched the Idiot Box. I watched the news. I didn't really pay too much attention. What was the difference? It didn't really matter to me. I had a wife, kids, business. That's the things I was focused on. But then when they talked about this one issue that I went and, served and fought and risked my own life to defend Israel. And the way they were portraying it, I would never want to be a part of whatever they were showing. And I felt like it was an attack even on me and everything I'd done. So I used the platforms. We had popular gyms at the time. As you can imagine, it caused a bit of a stir. There was people that boycotted us. That was probably my first boycotts. But I didn't care too much because I said to them, well, you're learning the Israeli army self-defense system, which is based on the mentality and the principles of the IDF, which is exactly what you're not you're standing against here in this operation in Gaza. So I didn't mind. We also gained probably a few members. Didn't really matter to me. But then it's kind of like I found a voice, and after that it all ended, I kind of enjoyed the limelight, and you see that that's something that's always that's a big part of my identity, I guess. Yeah. So I started voicing my
video, and then you started doing video clips, and
I started voicing my opinions about whatever, and some gym members that I don't know if they agreed with what I was saying or not. I was literally speaking my mind about anything, approaching things from what I thought was a common sense perspective. And people were saying, and I'm talking about happy gym members were saying, well, I get why you did Israel and all that, but maybe your gym pages are not the place to be, expressing your worldview and your opinions. So I opened an AVI YEMENI Facebook page, and the rest is history. That's a good
quick summary.
That would be 7 or 8 years ago now.
Let's go back to your youth and your childhood, which I had no idea about before I read your new book, and that's why we're talking today, because you've just issued and released this book, which is called A Rebel from the Start. Interesting title, Avi. Why did you choose that title?
I don't know. You've read at least a good portion of it. I think that title is pretty fitting. It literally describes my life.
So you were born how does a kid born in Melbourne end up in the Israeli Defence Forces? I mean, you had a pretty full-on childhood.
Yeah, so I guess I'm the 10th kid to 17 children. I was born the night my family moved to Melbourne. So they
stop it there for a sec. You were the 10th out of 17 kids. That is already an astounding
there
way
you go,
to start
a
life,
rebel
right?
from the start, and I rebelled against everything from day one. My family moved to Melbourne, and I was born that night, so I wasn't waiting for anything. Melbourne was going to be my home, and I came out. They had 8 kids in Israel and 1 in Sydney. They drove down, and I was born that night. And then
arrived in Melbourne, and you were born.
That's right. And my parents were ultra-Orthodox. My dad's not so much anymore, but that's another story. So I grew up in a really closed, tight-knit community, and it certainly has benefits, but also some cons. And back then, it's not like today. I think, I see a lot of the kids in that same community today when I go to events there or whatever, and they're a lot more worldly because you have something called the internet now, which even tight-knit and closed-off communities and enclaves can't really resist the kids from seeing the outside world. But back when I grew up, you knew who you knew, and you had a physical phone number for who you knew, and that was about it. So when I turned against the religion, as in I decided, nah, I don't want to do this anymore, I was given essentially an option: the streets or comply with religion. And I think for your viewers that know anything about me would know, when I'm given an option to go fend for myself or comply with totalitarian authoritative restrictions, I chose the streets, and I actually slept on the streets for a bit, and had a few rough years there, from breaking the law to
How old were you, Avi, when you was your dad who gave you that ultimatum, right? It was kind of like
yeah. So
you stick to the Orthodox
14.
religion.
It's crazy to think, because my kids now are two of them are essentially older than I was when I got kicked out of home, and I look at them and I go, if I kick them out of home, they're not going to survive. They can't even make breakfast on their own.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was 14, and so my really crazy years were probably 15 to 18, where I ended up on the wrong side of the law many times, and it ended with a bad heroin addiction.
Which is astounding to me. I mean, to look at you now, I when I read that, I thought, holy cow, that is something I did not expect to, and there's a lot in your book that I did not expect, but that is extraordinary. How did that descent happen?
You start on smoking weed just to be cool, and then you start going to parties, and it's party drugs, and you get yourself up, and then a friend introduced me to anyone that's done party drugs like ecstasy and speed or ice or meth or whatever. It gets you up, and you have to come down, and that come down can take, depends how high you went up, but it can take a few days, and it gets horrible. It's really depressing and hard on your body. And then a friend of mine just introduced me to this magic solution. You don't start off saying, I'm going to do heroin. Everybody starts off saying, I would never touch heroin. I would never touch a needle. I would never. And it just, with me, it happens. And one of the things you'll learn from my book is that I don't do things in halves. I'm a bit like my dad. I certainly got that from him. So, it ended up to a point where I was bad, addicted to heroin in a way that I never thought would happen to me. I thought I was better than that, but I'm only human. And as a kid, I got there, and thankfully, though, when I hit rock bottom, I recognized it, and I went crawling back to my parents' house, of all places, and they helped me get off it. I went into rehab, and that's where I signed up for the IDF. I did go to the Australian Army information session one time, because I was tossing up between, I knew I needed something. I needed a structure. I needed discipline. I had a couple of brothers that served in Israel. My uncles and aunties and, all my cousins obviously served in Israel from my mother's side. So I felt like in Israel, I'd actually be protecting my family. Right. My mum lives there. My mum's whole family. I have siblings that live there. And as a Jew, I just feel like it's the one state that Jews have if all hell breaks loose, as we've seen repeatedly in history. So that's when I signed up from rehab. They didn't know that at the time. Rehab to the Israeli Army.
Before we jump into the Israeli Army, I want to just talk about your time living rough, living on the streets and that sort of thing, and the drug stuff, because it gives you an insight, I think, that, and this is where I laugh when people say, oh, Avi Yemeni's not a real journalist. I'm a real journalist, and I can tell you that some of the stuff that you do has more depth and credibility than a lot of, particularly around COVID and what came out of Victoria during that period from the journalism class. But just to sort of dive deep, I think you have and bring a perspective that most journalists couldn't bring to the question of youth crime, the problem that we've got at the moment with youth crime, the problem that we've got with kids and drugs, raising kids now that you're a father. What's your takeaway of the situation in Australia at the moment on the situation of our youth crime problem and where we're heading and how we're handling it?
Well, it's funny. I actually talk about it in the book because I point out that I question, because even back, 25 years ago now? How old am I? I'm 38. So, 20 something years ago, where I already knew that you could play this race card to get out of trouble. I tell a story in there where, police pull me and I was with an Aussie friend, and we were walking in Moorabbin, and they pulled us over and for a random search that they could see. It wasn't hard to spot us. And the thing was, I had all these pills on me and my friend had nothing on him. So I immediately played the race card, and the police, those officers at the time, were just so scared. I was like, "What? You're targeting me because I'm an Arab, and all this." And
you told them you're an Arab.
Because I look like an Arab, so it's just an easy card. And they straight away backed down and went for my friend who had nothing on. And we just laughed the whole way home, thinking, how easy was it to mess with him, to manipulate him not to search me? And I think that's very true today on a much larger scale. We've seen that play out. You can see Indigenous communities, you see that a lot. But also even in the cities, it's that kind of policing. And it doesn't help anyone, because I look back at that time and I think, if that day I was actually caught and held accountable, I think I may have stopped a lot earlier. I think I may have, pulled my head in. If I got a real reality check, I wasn't actually evil. I was this kid that, firstly, I had a warped moral compass that was, I grew up thinking breaking the Sabbath and stealing breaking the Sabbath was probably worse. So, and I was already doing that. So I felt less guilt about robbing or stealing or. And
wow, that's a really interesting insight, right? So that the rigidity and strictness of your upbringing and the orthodoxy of your upbringing shifted your moral compass, so that if your sense of breaking the Sabbath was bad, then you broke the Sabbath. It kind of was like, well, everything else isn't so bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Breaking
the Sabbath was almost the worst thing. Breaking the Sabbath and eating pigs, the worst you could do. And I was eating pig. I like bacon. So everything else seemed like nothing. All right, whatever. So so I think now, I think the lesson I could learn from that, from my experience there, was, one is just cut out the whole the excuses that we create for kids, because even a kid like me who wasn't actually bad, if you gave me a real shock, it probably would have set me straight. I'm an exception to the rule. Almost everyone I know from back then, I can't say they made it, whether they're alive or not. They didn't make it in life. Almost everyone I know. So, especially those that got hooked on the drugs like I did. So, but
is that because of something innate in you, do you think, that you, or is it something they would have probably been able to do had the system been different, do you reckon?
I think if the system was different, a lot more people would get out of it.
Yeah.
But even if it's not different, what I find the problem is that the majority of those people will never get out of it. It's a cycle, and all you're doing. I knew I could break the law over and over and over and over and get away with it. Go to court, get a slap on the wrist, get out, and and that's back then. So, and back then they were much tougher than they are now.
Yeah.
So I think this idea that being soft on crime to try to give these kids a chance is a good thing. Well, I think from both sides it's not. I think from the kid's perspective, you've either got to shock him into reality. This is the real world. You want to do adult. You want to behave like a bad adult. You'll get treated like a bad adult. And either that'll straighten the kid up, or that kid's never going to straighten up. So it's time to protect the community. And I knew guys that did really bad things over and over again. And the only time they were really taken seriously was when they ended up killing someone. And that's a mad thing.
Yeah, we forget there are victims
madness
to these crimes, right? There are victims to these crimes. And even what might seem petty, just holding somebody up with a fake gun or something and stealing $100 off them, that can have a pretty big impact on that person's life, right?
For sure. And I think we've been focused for too many years on these youth that are on protecting them rather than their victims, and their victims are real. And again, I'm talking to somebody that if you held me accountable early, it probably would have shocked me straight. That's what I feel. And I can't say that for everyone else, but what I'm saying is those that it wouldn't shock straight, I don't think they're ever getting out of it anyways. They've got, a lot of those kids had, what do they call it, intergenerational trauma, but not the kind of intergenerational trauma that the left likes to go on about. It's literally kids that came from really broken families. My thing was not, I didn't come from that. I remember sitting in rooms with kids that were being given steroids just to heal their injuries from their homes. It was the craziest stuff. And I never felt that. I grew up, you know, my family was a loving environment. I had heaps of brothers and sisters. It was just that I didn't want to be religious. My biggest dream as a kid was to be adopted by a white Aussie, not Jewish, you know, single child. That was my biggest dream, because at the time I didn't see how beautiful it was. Right now I love it. My family is huge. I've got 16 brothers and sisters. I'm close to all of them now. No matter what the media says, I'm close to both my parents. So it's the best thing having that much family, and I love it because my kids they show off about how many cousins they have. But, you know, for me, I passed through that period of my life, and I told you before, parents often didn't let their kids, or didn't want their kids hanging out with me at 14, 15, 16. But the funny thing was, when I hit 20, 21, and I was finishing in the army, suddenly all those kids that weren't allowed to hang out with me because I was the bad influence, they were just starting to do they were just starting to go to the parties and take the ecstasies, and they were starting their journey at that age. By that point, I was trying to build my life. I was already getting married, although it wasn't the greatest relationship, but I got married young. I just set up businesses. I was really ready to take on the world.
Yeah. Mate, your work, there's a lot of stir in there. There's a lot of, taking truth to power, breaking the rules. That's sort of the kind of journalism that I grew up practicing in the 80s. That was the mainstream journalism back then. So I'm a little astounded by what we see now. I want to just play people some of your more serious work, though, because I think, this is, as I said, you bring a perspective that a lot of people don't bring. You went to Alice Springs recently.
Yeah.
Let's just have a look at a clip from that trip, and then we'll come back and have a chat about it.
From everyone we talk to, the answer is not the voice. The answer is their parents. The answer is enforcement, is giving the police the actual power to deal with it, because unfortunately right now there's nothing they can do.
They can't do anything to the youths. Like, they can't touch them.
12 and under. That's like the kids that were throwing rocks at us the other night. The coppers grabbed him and he was 12 and under, so all right, mate, nothing we can do. Catch you later. Go home.
You'll have them driving around in stolen cars. There'll be like 10 in a Commodore. And then they get pulled over and it's like, you know what you're doing wrong? It's like, no. It's like, all right, on your way. Like, they can't get touched because of how old they are.
Over down that street in Hartley Street there one night, and we had 3 stolen cars go past us within the hour, and the cops just follow them along. And I said to the coppers later on, because they walked past us, I said, so what, did you just catch them or what? And he said, no, they're underage.
How old are you? You're 12? 16. 16? Do you think there's problems in Alice Springs?
Yeah.
What kind of problems?
Kids, you know.
The children wandering like a lost sheep dogs. And they're breaking every house, including the main big bus holders passing by.
I reckon it's scary to live here. I'm there. I was thinking to go down Adelaide anyway, travel. I'd rather go and I'm with too much kids.
Most of the kids that are running around don't even have their own bedrooms. You know, a safe place to go back to.
How old are you?
15.
15. Are you boys going to be out all night?
Yeah.
What are we doing here tonight?
Just walking around.
What is that?
Betting.
Why are you not at home?
Because it's boring.
So, Avi, what was that trip like, Alice Springs? Why did you decide to go?
Well, you know, it was eye-opening for me even because I'd never really been there. I didn't know what to expect. I'd spoken to locals over the phone, and it was it got my adrenaline going, even just walking those streets. But the reason why I went is because, again, the ABC, the same people who got me into journalism in the beginning, pushed out this report that there was a town meeting and essentially everyone that went there was racist. And I thought, that doesn't sound right. And you've got some inner city Aboriginal journalist that, you know, the ABC has sent down there to run this report. And when I was talking to locals, they were shocked and hurt by that story. And I thought, you know what, there's no one actually on the ground there just talking, doing what I've done everywhere else, which is just talking to either the locals, you know, the local people that live there, the adults, and also the ones causing the problems, the kids. So we head there. Seemed like the perfect place for a rebel reporter.
And your perspective on the problem?
So, look, it is, when you ask anyone there, it's not a black and white thing. Honestly, the whole idea of the race, that you're not allowed to identify the group because they happen to be Aboriginal is a luxury we have in the cities, and it's pushed by generally white people from their white guilt or these activist Aboriginal, you know, Lydia Thorpe types that don't live in remote communities like all of them. There's some stuff that I couldn't even put to air that we caught on the streets there, which were local Aboriginal people, how they want to see the issue dealt with. And, you know, they were calling for some hectic violence against, and the way that they labelled the kids would be considered extremely racist if a white person, but that's just how they talk about it and talk about, because for them, when I say it's not a black and white issue, that they're not offended if you call it for what it is there. When you say they're Aboriginal Indigenous youth, well, they call them blackfellas, they're blackfella kids, they recognise that they say that because that's just the fact. Whereas here there's this idea that we're not allowed to even identify the issue, so how are you ever going to be able to fix it? And then you see, you know, they were talking about, I asked people about some of the strongest voices for Indigenous affairs and The Voice and all these. They don't care. No one cared about any of that. They don't even know what that means. What they really want is for somebody to come in and sort out those kids. And those kids are living in this lawless kind of environment where the police either don't have the power in some situations because the kids are so young, or there's this entire the entire system of how the policing, how they've been taught to police it, is just so soft and weird because, you know, we keep hearing they don't want to be painted as racist policing or whatever. So, and you know, all we hear is about the incarceration rates and all this, but their victims are often Indigenous. Everyone in Alice Springs had a story, black, white, whatever, and they were all pointing to these kids that I ended up speaking to who think they're living in America, so they're emulating American pop culture, rap, gangster rap culture, and they'll do anything because there's no real penalty, and even if you go to juvenile detention, they think of it as a holiday because their houses are worse. It's probably less violent than at home. They get food. They're hanging out with what they told me with their brothers. So there's.
Did this bring up anything for you? Like, I mean, did you sort of stand there going, I can relate to this?
Yeah. So from certain aspects, absolutely, and that's probably why I could go up and talk to them and other mainstream journalists, whether they wanted to or not. I don't think they wanted to because it didn't suit their narrative. But I was just able to go and chat to them because I was once a try-hard African American. You want me to tell you a little secret? Oh, this is embarrassing. I've never told anyone this.
An exclusive.
Exclusive. Do you know when I was 14, I got Thug Life tattooed across my stomach because I wanted to be Tupac Shakur so much. So I totally get that African American. You can run that. I mean, I've had it lasered off, so the embarrassment's gone. My kids will never let me live it down. But I did, and in fact, Tupac had I think he had an AK on his one, and I put an Uzi because I was for Israel.
Right. Okay. So you were well into that culture.
But I did just like these kids. So I and I was able to talk to them because I can talk in their language to an extent. I never lived in a remote Aboriginal community, and that comes with its own sets of problems. But when you say we need to listen to people, then The Voice, for example, is complete nonsense because they're never going to actually listen to the Indigenous people on the streets of Alice Springs. They're never going to listen to them. And trust me, when you listen to them, you realize that all this garbage about racism and that it gets destroyed immediately, and that's not what the people pushing for The Voice and pushing for all these changes in the name of helping Indigenous communities. That's not what it's not what they want. It's not the outcome they want. So it's never going to happen. We can listen to them today. I'm happy to give anyone the recordings, the unedited interviews that I could never publish anywhere, so you could see what local people think about the problem and the solutions.
Avi, thanks for that insight. Back to you though. So you were about 17 when you approached the Australian Army. You had too big a rap sheet to go into the Australian Army. You went to Israel. You couldn't go straight into the army, right?
Yeah, so I was about 18. And I did what's called Aliyah, because the unit that I wanted to get into, which is Golani, it's an elite infantry unit that in my family everybody goes. It's kind of it's a Yemen thing. It's in Israel you have, even though the narrative is that Israel is European Jews that escaped after the war, the truth is that Israel's made up of. You've got a section that are European Jews, and the other half is European Jews. The other half are Arab Jews that escaped the Arab countries around 48, like my family from Yemen. And then you have the ones that lived in Israel with the Arabs before under the British Mandate. So Golani is very made up. It's a unit that, especially back then, it prides itself in being kind of your ethnic, your Arab unit, rather than, for example, paratroopers was very much your European unit. And I really wanted to go there because that's where all my family went, except my only uncle that was killed in the 6 Day War in 1967. He actually went to the paratroopers, so it was never a good thing to steer away from. It's got a bad, I guess, bad
vibe for the family.
Bad luck thing there. Superstitious.
So it's the Golani.
Golani Brigade, yeah.
Golani
so I had
Brigade,
to sign up, do Aliyah, become a citizen, and then I was able. But first they put me in. I had to learn some Hebrew. I had the most embarrassing Hebrew when I got to Israel.
How
because
is it
the
now?
only Hebrew I kind of knew was from biblical studies as a kid. which if in English, if you compare it, it's like somebody immigrates to Australia and the only English they've ever learnt was Shakespeare English. Imagine them walking around talking. That was me in Israel. I got mocked so much, even to the end. Even to the end.
Thou shalt buy me a beer.
Yeah. No, it would be even funnier than that. It's the stuff that I said was just insane and funny, but they could understand what I was trying to say. Yes. It would be the equivalent of speaking Shakespeare English here.
So you did the language course, then they took you you did make it into the.
I made it in. It was that itself was a wild ride. I injured myself beforehand getting too excited, but I did get in. I served most of myself. I was in Lebanon at the end of the war, but most of my service, most of my deployment was in the Gaza Strip.
You actually saw action and you came under fire, right?
Yeah, a few times, but I tell you something. One thing about combat is it really highlights who's the serious ones and who are the big loudmouths like me. You know, I was all excited and staunch and ready to go, but I could tell you there's nothing scarier than being shot at from close or distance. There's I think the most hectic evening time of my service was when we'd gone into Gaza to try to either capture or kill these terrorist unit terrorist cell that was firing rockets from these fields that we'd had the intel on and everything. And we went in there and we hid there for a couple of days, but they never ended up coming, which was a bit weird. And as we walked back towards Israel in formation, we'd been ambushed from 10 or 15 meters in the bushes ahead. So they obviously knew, they'd obviously seen us coming in and they'd planned to get us on the way out. And as we engaged them, then suddenly from probably 300, 400, 500 meters behind us, we were getting hit with long range weapons. And I remember there was this little, I was crapping myself. You know what, I could act like I was so tough. I was so scared. And my gun jammed. It was a crappy freaking M4. And till the end of my service, everybody always, because I was swearing in English, Hebrew, and I was saying in Hebrew, I freaking cleaned this thing, and I'm basically over this little sand dune. I'm trying to dodge bullets because you're getting hit from in front, and I could see him hitting the ground next to me. I got a gun jam, and then we're getting hit from long range behind. And I thought we were going to die that night. I thought we were going to die. That's the end of it. And it's the most powerless feeling. Like, at least if somebody's shooting at you, if you can shoot back, you feel like you have some sort of power. That night, when I was jumping over this dune and just trying to avoid getting hit and not being able to fire back was the toughest, it was a crazy experience. And then until we heard there was the chopper that flew over, and then as loud as the chopper itself was, it started firing these rocket launches. Have you ever watched, Scarface?
Yeah.
Scarface at the end, he goes, "Say hello to my little friend," and he fires that little rocket launcher.
Right.
And it shoots that. So it actually shoots that same thing, but automatic. So you can't even hear the chopper. You just hear this thing going pop, 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 pop. And I'm like, thank God we're going to survive. It went from we're definitely dead to, oh my God, we're good. And
well, you would have been, I guess, without the chopper coming in, right? If you had no...
if the chopper didn't come, I think we were done for, because we were outgunned from... And the problem wasn't the ones close range, because we could have dealt with them, but the problem was we were also being hit from behind with long range, and I couldn't. You could just shoot in that direction, but you can't really see where they'll come from.
Did you all get out okay?
Yeah, so a couple of our guys got hit, but minor injuries.
Again, it gives you an insight into stuff that's happening today that other people wouldn't have. I mean, how do you relate when you hear stories like what's going on with Ben Roberts-Smith?
Yeah. I think it's funny, when I listen to journalists sitting here and writing their stories and their books and making money off the service of others. And there may be moments in any soldier's thing that he may not be proud of. I can't point to anything specifically like that. I'm pretty proud of my service, but I just think it's so easy for a journalist who these same soldiers have fought and bled and watched their friends die to protect these same freedoms that allows them to even rubbish the work of our heroes. And things happen in combat, and in the cases of some of the stories that I hear, you've also got to remember when you see your friends getting shot, and you get certain parts of intel, and there's this sense of we've got to find these people that did this to our comrades. It's just so it's sad to watch so many Australians accept the story that's written.
The idea that you can tell a civilian from an operative, right? It's you can't, can you?
Not in these kind of not in these guerrilla wars. So same as Afghanistan and to the Gaza Strip, it's the same idea. They hide. I talk about it in my book. There was one story where there was a dad and his two little kids walking towards the border fence, waving a white flag, and in that moment, us having to deal with whether he's getting shot at from Hamas from the back, but it could all be a setup, and you don't know if they're strapped and it's just trying to set us up to kill us, or they really want our help. So you've got to go into every situation, and you've got these. You want to help people, but you also don't want to get yourselves killed, and you never know when it's the right thing, and you feel for.
But we'll sit back here, mate. We'll sit back here in our lounge chairs. And
we'll write a story. So in that moment, I guess I'm not articulating it really well now.
No,
but
you are.
Thinking,
it's
as a soldier at the time, I remember looking at these people and simultaneously feeling so bad for this Palestinian father and his kids. And I didn't even have kids at the time. I grew up around kids. I had a lot of nieces and nephews, but I didn't even have kids at that time. So I don't think until you have kids, you can't understand that love for kids. Until you have kids, you don't understand that love. You can do whatever you want to me, but the love for your kid, or I think any good parent has for his kid. And I remember watching it even before I had kids and going, gosh, if this is real, that is the most horrible situation. You've got this Palestinian with his Palestinian kids who's coming to the enemy for help, being shot at by his own people. I don't know his whole story. That's enough of a picture for me to go, wow, that's painful. But at the same time, I'm also thinking, could this guy be actually Hamas, who's using that emotional manipulation and using his kids to kill us?
Yeah.
And
it's just too much.
Imagine the one thing that they have in Israel, at least, I think it's changing now, but back then was, I think still to a large degree now, is that because Israelis' survival depends on it, there's a lot more support for soldiers, and if Ben Roberts was in Israel,
right.
And soldiers go to court and they get pulled. If you do the wrong thing, you're held accountable. But I think you get broader support in the public, and journalists don't get away with just writing crap based on
Mate, there is a lot more in the book about this that I think is just fascinating. It was a great read, so I'll just I reckon people have got to get this book and read it. But I want to move on because I want to talk about you later. I mean, you're only we're up to you being 20 years old.
Oh no, that's
you've lived more life.
It's funny.
Basically, you got married while you were in the IDF to an Australian.
Yeah, well, we got engaged while I was in the IDF. We got married as soon as I got back. Yeah, it was. You know, it's the relationship that my detractors love to weaponize, to use against me. About one thing later after my divorce that they often bring up to try destroy my character so that nobody would listen to me. And
this is how the left operate. They destroy reputations. They attack reputations. It's like, just don't listen to anything AVI YEMENI says because AVI YEMENI...
Yeah. Do you know what? And I think the only hurtful thing about that, I don't mind. People have called me all sorts of things through the years, and you can laugh off most of it.
Dude, you've been shot at in the Gaza Strip. I'm pretty sure some lefty lunatic
I don't mind that, but the one thing
Sydney's not going to bother you.
That is difficult.
The context is that you'd lost custody of your kids, right?
Yeah, so it was essentially, you still can't talk about certain parts because of Australian law, but I do my best trying to explain it. But there's a formula that unfortunately many women use to get back at their exes. In my case, when I got into a new relationship, a healthy relationship after being divorced, and you're essentially, I was put in a situation where, because if you have open domestic violence matters, you're not getting your kids. So, and so I was given an ultimatum. There's two ways that you can close a domestic violence matter. You can plead guilty to it, which would close it, and then you can get your kids. As long as it's not a serious domestic violence thing, then it actually could hinder you from getting your kids back. Or, you can fight it, but in that period of time while you fight it, which takes a couple of years, on a good day, you won't really get your kids. So that was an easy choice for me. There was no way that I pled guilty to a summary offense. It was the media was sitting in there. The media was sitting in that courtroom asking for images. They asked for images. They were asking for anything, doctor reports, anything that they could publish to go with their story, their headline. AVI YEMENI pleads guilty to assaulting ex-wife. They wanted a big photo there of her face all mangled up, and the judge agreed. They granted it, but guess what? There was no photos because it never happened. I pled guilty to a crime I didn't commit because I care more about seeing my kids. Like I told you before, until you have kids, I don't think you can understand that.
So again, we come back to this idea that the news is a construct. It's a narrative. They go in with a narrative, and then they formulate and structure the story around
They wanted
that
a story, and the funny thing is, I'll tell you something. In that courtroom, there was all the media was there. At least the Herald Sun and the Age were both there. The Age, I thought they were going to destroy me. They actually, because when they heard the context of the story, they didn't run it. Good. It was the leader, the Herald Sun guy, who hated me. He's written the same story for 2 years. He wrote that same, because it was the only story that this guy was getting clicks on. So he was using me and weaponizing my ex-wife and that whole lie to be able to get clicks for himself. But he was there. He knew the context, and there's certain parts of context, just like I can't tell you here, he's not allowed to report, which is fine. But the thing is, if you're an honest journalist and you know context, even context that you can't report, you've got to somehow tell it, or
be fair to that context, be true to that.
You need to be fair to that context. Yeah. And I'm lucky, I'm fortunate. When you see the rest, if you read to the end of my book, you see how I am the luckiest person on the planet, even though I went through all that. And that to me was the most horrible thing, the fact that people have been able to smear me as the one thing I am not. The one thing
I just want to talk about this for a sec, mate, because it's bloody important, and there are lots of men out there suffering. And I'm not doing a man versus woman thing here, but I'm just saying we have to acknowledge the suffering that goes on under Australian family law, because we hear about it endlessly in the media. And
I talk about a day that there's a day in the book I refer to it because it's what we call, my wife and I now. It's the day that we don't talk about, and it's a day where if I didn't have with everything I've been through in my life, that would be the day that I wouldn't be here today if she wasn't there.
But you've got through it, Avi, so what's your message to guys who are going through this now? I can't imagine anything worse than being not.
And I get a lot of messages from guys. I get a lot of messages from guys who, especially when it first happens, when they first lose their kids and lose their rights. The message is, firstly, when it first happens, just breathe and don't do what your natural instinct is. If you're innocent, the thing that's going to get you is your next move. So if you're pulled into an interview, give a no comment statement. That was my biggest mistake, is that I was so sure I was innocent. In fact, I did 2 interviews on that day. They dragged me off a plane. And I did 2 interviews, 2 police interviews for 2 separate matters. One for this thing with my ex-wife, and then one for this fake Greens, candidate that was making allegations about it. With the Greens one, I knew the form. I knew no comment, and I laughed it off. I didn't care about that. When it came to my ex-wife, I was so sure that I didn't do it. And I called this lawyer. He was the dumbest lawyer on the planet because he gave me the worst advice. And I was so sure I didn't do it that I said, I didn't do it. I want them to know I didn't do it. I don't want anyone to think I would ever hit a woman. And he goes, oh, if you say that, sure, then there's no problem in cooperating. Worst advice you can get from any lawyer. But don't do your natural instinct. Just remember, firstly, police, when they want to interview you, it is not to get your side of the story. It is literally to get you to incriminate yourself. Then remember, you're going to have to fight for you don't have rights. You are guilty till proven innocent, but you're going to have to be patient with it. And the thing is, it gets better, and you will, if you are willing to fight for it. You're not alone. You're not the only person in Australia or on the planet that's gone through this. It happens. You will sit in court. You will spend a year or a year and a half sitting in courts and watching it happening to man after man after man after man. It is a formula, and they will get all the help in the world, especially if they claim that they're domestic violence victims. Everything will be funded for them. It won't be. The system is rigged against you. I'll give you an example. There is a men's behavioural change course. There is no women's behavioural change course. The men's behavioural change course is to help you teach men not to be domestic violence perpetrators. And when you come in there, they make you fill out a form, right? And the form is you're meant to 1 to 5. And I was completely honest when I filled this form out. You're meant to number 1 to 5 how much you do these things, right? When we're talking about domestic violence, only one of, I don't know, the 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 things that they have listed. I couldn't tell you how many, but it's pages, right? Pages of things that you've got to go 1 to 5, do you do this, right? Only 1 or 2 or 3 of those many, many things, with pages of things, are physical domestic violence. The rest of the stuff on there are verbal, are emotional, are financial. So many of those things on there, women do, or at least in my experience, if we had to look at it evenly, I would have been, if you had 2 of them that were answered honestly between them, I would have been the victim of domestic violence. My point here is that they claim that all these things are domestic violence, yet they only have a men's behavioural change course, even though physical violence, I think a lot of women do hit men, but men are not scared in those situations. So the women that are scared in the physical domestic violence against women, that is perpetrated by men, and it's a small minority of really bad men. There are those men out there. Trust me, they're not signing up to men's behavioural change courses. They couldn't give a shit. They're not going to listen to some other person tell them. But the men that often do these courses sign up to it because it's part of the process, and when you realize that there is no equivalent for women to learn how to not do the same things that they call domestic violence, you realize how rigged the system is. But men need to realize from the beginning is don't do anything rash. You need to just breathe and get through it, and it is a process, and you're not alone. You're not the only person that's gone through it. It's a formula, and the only way you'll... Sorry?
Things will get better over time.
Things will get better, especially if you don't do anything out of pure emotion, which is easy for me to say now on the other end of it. Yeah. But I wish somebody was there to tell me, no, just wait, just breathe. Don't make that phone call. Don't do that. I know you didn't do it. And, you've just got to get through each thing. And at the end of the day, you might get to a point where you're going to have to choose your pride or your kids.
Can you talk about what happened that day?
So what really happened that day was that I was at the neighbor's house before the Sabbath. We were kind of keeping, she had converted, and we were keeping the traditional Jewish thing. So every Friday we did the Sabbath, Friday night. So she was cooking at home. I was with her two boys. She had two children from a previous relationship that I raised. And we were over at the neighbor's house that we were very close to. And then we came back and look, the relationship was really toxic, and it was, when it was good, it was really good, and when it was bad, it was really bad. There was no natural middle. It never was just a calm relationship, and I had nothing to compare it on before that in my life. I never really had a healthy relationship. I grew up in a family of 17 kids. I never had that one-on-one time. I never saw my parents have that healthy relationship like I experience now. Later, as I got older and I learned about myself and what I expect in life, and actually fell into a really good, healthy relationship, I didn't know what I was experiencing. I thought it was just normal. It's just part of the thing. And so we got into an argument, and I slammed the chopping while preparing food. I slammed the chopping board on the counter, which kind of bounced and hit her, but it was not a non-incident. Nothing happened. There was no bruise, doctor. There was no...
You didn't pick up the chopping board and throw it at her?
No. And it was never like if you think of our relationship back then as well, it was toxic. When we fought, she would throw the remote. She would, we both did, but it was never at each other. And so it definitely wasn't that. But the problem was, like I told you before, when you get put into an interview room and because you're so sure, you didn't do that. Now, when you kind of admit to, oh yeah, I remember that incident, and then you kind of locked yourself into this thing that that if I didn't, I possibly could have shut down the That's why it was my biggest mistake, because I probably could have shut down the entire domestic violence thing if I didn't even admit to that.
Right.
That non-incident happening. But because I sat in the room and I was so sure, because I knew I'd never, ever, ever in my life hit a woman, let alone my ex-wife. I knew it wasn't true.
Just explain to me, because I don't think a lot of people realize this. We have some pretty kooky laws in this country. Why couldn't
I have to be really careful what I say here.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But can you talk about why you can't talk about it?
Yeah, so
without talking about it?
No. I can't really. All I can say to you is there's really, when it comes to family violence and things like that, there are in Australian law there's reasons why you can't talk about anything for a period, and then under Australian law why you still can't tell certain parts of it.
Right. So you've only just now been able to talk about this at all.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Exactly.
So you have to live with that accusation over your head.
I had to sit there and hear people say, and I couldn't even say, no, that's not true.
Wow.
And that's hard, because I know that so many of my followers, supporters who have tried to defend me, that I would love to have just armed with, no, I didn't do it. And people that probably like my work but they keep seeing this one thing because the left and the detractors just wouldn't let up on this one thing because they knew it's the one thing to shame people out of saying that they like Avi Yemeni. What, you like a woman basher? And the fact that I am silent is what most people understood as an admission of guilt. And that's the unfortunate thing that's unique to probably my case more than other people, because mine played out in a public arena, thanks to the media that just, for obvious reasons, would love to knock me down. And specifically certain journalists, that's the thing is when the media publishes fake news, just like when I saw it with Israel or in my case, fake news is also telling half a story. So picking the parts of the story that so you can't I can't sue him for defamation because I did plead guilty to assaulting my ex-wife. That's true. So, but the missing of all the context there and the fact that even the wording when they did it, the other thing that I did plead guilty on that day too was sending 3 text messages, which were mean. In a 10-year marriage, they weren't very nice. We had a toxic relationship, and there were messages both ways that were not very nice. But they weren't nice, and I'm a bit embarrassed by them. But they're not threatening, nothing like that. The thing is, if I'd said them to her, there's no crime. The crime is using a carriage service to harass, right? So it's in a 10-year marriage, sending 3 not nice text messages, and I guarantee you that if you look through most people that have been married for more than 5 years, you're going to find some just as bad text messages, if not a lot worse. And people don't realize that can come back to haunt you if your ex wants to use it against you. That's just the reality, is that using a carriage service to menace and harass, that's a federal offense. That was worse than the chopping board. No one talks about it because it doesn't sound as bad, but that was a worse offense. And I actually did that. Offense, I pleaded guilty to that because I did that. I did it. I wrote that. I didn't realize it was an offense to say you're not a nice word. I'm not going to repeat it.
Yeah, well, stuff we'd all say in relationships perhaps
exactly,
later, but you've done it over because we've done it over a carriage service. Sounds like something out of the
Exactly.
1800s.
So the way that the Herald Sun reported it was they called it brutal harassment. So they made it out like I assaulted her.
Yeah.
By throwing a chopping board. Even if you read their story at the beginning and you're a bit of a critical thinker, you'd think it's a bit weird. This abusive guy, through his 10-year marriage, and through his whole life, he's been around for, I've been with many girls in my life, and in my whole life, my ex-wife who happened to remember it when I was with my new wife, came with, and I got charged for one weird incident of throwing a chopping board. So never had any other domestic, and for texting her 3 times in the marriage. So they framed it as he pled guilty to assaulting his ex-wife, and he brutally harassed her with 3 text messages. That's what they do to try to destroy. And they knew that I couldn't answer. They knew I couldn't say anything. They knew, and he ran. That guy, I forgot his name. He's a nobody. This guy, that his most read articles for the Herald Sun, he's a reporter for the Leader. His most read articles of all time, I can guarantee you they are his most read. And he ran them 3 times, or 3 or 4 times he ran it. The same story in different, over 2 years. Like 2 years later, still running my story, reframing it in another way. But because he knew that I couldn't respond to it, and saying that I brutally harassed my ex-wife, that I had assaulted. It's just the way you paint this picture that, of course, the general public who just believe what they read would think, oh, this is a horrible person. This is a horrible person. He pled guilty to assaulting his ex-wife, and then he brutally harassed her. But
yeah.
The best thing
it's not hard to build a narrative that tears down somebody's reputation and character. It's very hard to
It's not very hard,
that.
especially when you have that. And then on top of that, you know that they can't respond. And when you have the power of the media, that enormous machine. And the sad thing is, it was the Herald Sun that was actually worse than The Age. The Age guy came up to me that day and had a chat to me, and I said to him, mate, I would love to talk to you, but I can't. I go, I don't want to, just like just like I'm pleading guilty to something I didn't do because I want to see my kids. I don't want to go to jail for clearing my name to you and then not see my kids anyways. I go,
yeah.
And he didn't run the
And
story.
you can't sue for defamation because you pled guilty, right? So you can't be defamed. Because
that's what I'm saying to you. When people say to you, why don't you sue him for defamation? It's not defamation because I did plead guilty to that. And yes, I sent those text messages. Was it brutal harassment? That's an opinion piece. Brutal harassment. Well,
absolutely.
I dare say that sending 3 text messages to your wife in a marriage of 10 years that are not nice. Again, not threatening. We're talking about.
Look, these are things that we all say in the heat of the moment when we're emotionally upset, and there's probably not a person watching this who can't say that they haven't said them.
I take complete ownership over the fact that I was young, and it was a relationship I should have never gotten into. I get into it in my book. And I'm not putting it all on her. No way. And I don't do that in my book either. So if you and it's funny because I see my haters on the left, they go on about that I'm blaming her. I'm doing
you're victim blaming.
It's clearly you didn't read the book because she's the mother of my kids, and I'm not going to do that. And I care still about my kids more than anything.
I've learned from some pretty smart people that you can't win in these arguments.
No. And at the end of the day, it's not, I don't think it's even her. I think it's the system that I have a problem with, because the system just made it easy for people, and usually women, it's made it really easy for them to take out their anger and not think about the future of the kids or whatever. Just it makes it too easy to abuse it, to get back at the guy that they're really angry with. And
mate, I would love to be able to say that it's rare. I really would, but in this country, it is not rare. I've got close friends that are going through it right now. So
anyone who thinks it's rare, go spend a few days at any local magistrate's court. I guarantee you'll get a shock of your life.
Yep.
Sit in the courtroom.
We are out of time, mate, but look, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate the discussion, and great life story, incredible book, great read too. So
I appreciate it.
Everybody gets a hold of it.
I'd say, look to your viewers, let them know that it actually gets happy at the end. It's not. It's actually.
Yeah, it's not all sad. It's happy at the end. I will get to the end, mate.
It has a happy ending, no, but it's also even in the dark times. I think I am now at a point in my life where I can look back and take a lot of the good out of my experience. In fact, it made me who I am today, and I feel like in my work today, I'm able to see the perspective of a lot more people. I'm actually a lot more empathetic than people would think because I've lived so many lives and had so many experiences.
Yeah. Great stuff. Thanks very much, Avi. Great to talk to you. We hope to have you back on sometime soon.
Thanks, mate.
Take care. Okay, Avi Yemeni there, and it is a fantastic book, Rebel from the Start. Grab a copy on Amazon. It is coming out. Official launches are happening in Melbourne, I think, on the 27th of August, and in New Zealand, in Auckland and Wellington on the days prior to that, so keep an eye out for that. But rebelnews.com if you want to check out Avi's work as well. Thanks for joining us tonight. That is The Other Side interviews for another week. We'll be back with The Other Side Australia on Friday night at 8 o'clock, streaming here on ADH TV. And don't forget The Other Side interviews every Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. You have a great week, and we'll see you then.